To this tonight, because it's just too cold. And I know it's a Zoom, but I don't care. It's still too cold. So I really appreciate your time. And I also want to commend all of you for thinking about applying for awards. Obviously, it's something that I work with, but I know that it's very intimidating to put yourself out there, to put your work out, to feel judged, when you're trying to get a summer internship or an award or a fellowship. And I think based on what I know of this group, I know that you're all very talented and you're all working very hard. But I also know it takes some bravery to do that. It feels like a risk. And so I just want to talk to you tonight about just ways that hopefully can help you, and also let you know that I'm happy to talk to you individually. But I do really admire all of you that put yourselves out there and apply for these awards. And I guess what I will go ahead and do is start. What I don't want to do is talk too long, and hopefully Jesse or Haven will give me the hook and pull me off the stage if they need to, because they know I can talk too long. But I also want to give you some time for some questions. The reason we have this kind of obnoxious and very bold slide is because it's one of the most crucial pieces. Before you start writing, please read the prompt carefully. And I know that you're very smart and very accomplished, but I think we get excited, you launch into it, people assume they know sometimes what the funder or the foundation or the award issuer wants, and sometimes you don't exactly. So reading the prompt very carefully is important. It's easy to even read the prompt and start writing and realize and get off track. So it's a good idea to keep the prompt close by and read it. And as I say, sometimes the prompt is tell me about yourself or the equivalent like that. And that's a very hard, how do you know what you should say? But if you are applying for an award, that's being offered by Beckman, where it's a STEM award, particularly about research, or an REU where it's about research, but there can be other things as well. Goldwater, we've just had students applying for. If the prompt is too broad and you don't know, look at what the funder does, right? And look at what their values are, because that will help guide you into what you should be talking about. Because oftentimes when you're applying for one of these big awards in STEM, even if they have a broad prompt like, tell us what you want to do, or tell us your goals, or tell us about yourself, they really mean in a very limited sense. They do not want to know about your childhood. You do not have any therapy speak. They really want to know you in the context of what they're interested in, which in the case of some of the awards we're going to talk about tonight is your research, your interest in proceeding in a scientific research career, right? So that's what you're going to stick to. I just put these statement prompts on here so that you would have them and you could give them a quick read. And obviously, I mean, the Beckman one is correct because we had access, or the Cure Fellowship, you could see. But for these for the NSF REU, I don't know if any of you have applied in the past, but I just took a general one. Some of them are more specific. Oftentimes they are very broad. Write a short essay detailing your personal and professional goals. They don't really want your personal goals. I know it says that. But your personal goals might be how many times you want to be in the gym this year, right? Or they don't necessarily need those. They really are looking at professional research goals, and specifically how that particular REU fits into your plan. Right. So remember, specificity is the word we're going to talk about a lot here. So reading these prompts and really trying to look at the specifics of what they want is helps students be much more successful, I think. Well, and not only you as students, but also faculty do this as well when they respond to prompts. So you're learning a skill now that you're going to keep learning throughout your career, for those of you who want to go into either working as a faculty or in a research environment, whether that be a lab that's with an industrial and with industry, you want to make sure that you're responding to the specific goals that they have. So I'll give that a second. And I don't know, Jesse, we can share this with students if they have a question, right? And when you apply for whatever you're applying for and you open your application, obviously you'll have access to these prompts. But I was just wanting to give you something to think about as we start our conversation. And I think we're probably a small enough group. If one of you wanted to put a question in the chat, you don't necessarily have to wait till the end. Obviously, I'm going to give you time. But if you had a question about something that we're talking about as we go, I'm fine with being interrupted. And Jesse, you can monitor that, right? But I'm absolutely fine with taking questions along the way. Okay, so where should you begin? And I already have a little bit of a disquiet about my next thing, because I don't really mean, I do want you to have a good opening paragraph, but basically I want you to have a really good kind of first half. And I want to talk about, let's say right now we're talking about a page. Reviewers, you do want to pull them in to where they're interested in you. Sometimes, if you want to move out broader, do it later in your essay, or if you want to bring in something that's a little bit tangential, do it a little bit later. But oftentimes students will leave their gold for late in the essay. Don't do that, right? It's much better to put it early. So even if it's not in your very first opening paragraph, but make it early, give them what they need to know, because some reviewers for some awards or something are skimmers, or they're looking, and if they're not interested immediately, then they are maybe less attentive as they go on. If they shouldn't do that, but we know that's human and that happens. So one of the things I do want to say though is you don't have to have a dramatic opening paragraph. Sometimes I think we feel like we do have to have that you have to find the exactly right hook. And, if you, whatever, you built a telescope in your garage at 12, you don't necessarily have to have, if you did that, great, and that might be, but you don't really have to have that. I think sometimes people worry about that too much. You just want to have a solid paragraph that shares information, right? But it doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to have a hook. Some people write very well that way and they can manage it, and other people just need to really focus on what they're doing and putting in solid information, and that's fine. We were going to do this when we were in person, and I realized or when we were all together, we were going to have you take a few minutes to draft an opening sentence for your statement. And so I realize that may be harder on Zoom, but maybe you have a little bit of piece of paper with you, or you could pull open your phone and in your notes. But maybe we could just take a minute and you could write a sentence. How would you open a statement? What do you think is your most common choice that you make? And a lot of you have written statements of these kinds. So I'm going to give you a few seconds, maybe 30 or something, to just, doesn't have to be your complete sentence, but even your good idea. We've gone over a little, about 30 seconds, but I'll give us a few more, and because it's hard to write a whole sentence in 30 seconds. Okay, it's been a minute, and I'm just going to stop because I assume maybe you have some idea or something about how you would normally start a paragraph. And I'm not asking you to show this to me, so don't, for any of you who might have been nervous about that, please don't. I just wanted you to think about that. And mostly because I wanted to talk to you about this. Here's what I see all the time for a personal statement. Hello, my name is, and I'm majoring in, or hi, or just my name is. But we see this all the time, which is why I bring it up. Because it's it's something you think of initially. It makes you feel comfortable to start with that. It's like solid ground. You know your name, you know your major, and then it allows you to go on. But I would say, even if you need to write it down to start, then take it out later. Because one, most of you are applying for awards that will have other parts of an application to it. Might have your CV, probably will have your transcript, might have an online application that goes with it where you give your demographic information, your name and your address and your major and things like that. So mostly this information is going to be provided multiple times in an application already. And so you don't need to do this. You may, if you think it's an application where you're having to send it in, or they don't have it on one of these big survey managers, and maybe we don't always for some awards at UK, put your name in the bottom of the or at the top corner so that you can make sure people know it's your statement. Don't put it in the body of your work, because you don't need it. They get it. And one of the things we'll talk about a little bit about later is not repeating and using your real estate well. And the more competitive it gets as you move forward in your career and your academic life, the more you want to use the space given to you with the most value that you can. And what that means is you don't want to repeat things, and you don't want to have a throwaway sentence as your opening. So this is just one thing I want to say to you. You do not have to do this. Now, there are lots of other sentences that I might not suggest that you do either, but this is one that we see all the time. So I just want to say, please don't do this, whether it's a cover letter, whether it's a personal statement, whether it's a research statement. Please, this is not necessary for you to do. One other thing, I just couldn't quite find a place to put this, but this is just good writing, I think. And we sometimes, because you might work on your statement at multiple times, of course you will. I'm finding that we kind of forget some of the importance of having a thesis statement for a paragraph and then keeping that as the topic for your paragraph. And I want to talk to you about, I don't want you to use all your writing rules that you learned in school about you have to have, you have to tell us what you're going to tell us. You have to give us the body where you tell us. And then you have to have a closing paragraph that tells us what you told us already. You don't need to do that in a personal statement, right? So that's one of the rules you can set aside. That is not necessary. And we will talk about that. But what you do need is to have each paragraph have a topic that you stay with, right? And that you then follow and have a new paragraph. So what will happen is I will see a student and they will be writing about their research, and then all of a sudden they will kind of get off and they will say, and something about this course I was taking, and I'm really interested in being a hard worker or whatever. And then 2 paragraphs later, they'll go back to their research. And I think that's probably just something about how we think sometimes, or when we started in an essay. But it's really not, it's hard to read an essay like that. It's become really common. And so what I would say to you is to really be alert to that. If you're going to talk about your research project, talk about it. Use the whole paragraph. Trust me, you can. You should be doing research that you could talk about for a whole paragraph, maybe even 2, right? And maybe at some point in that second paragraph, you also talk about if it's going to lead to a publication or it's leading to a presentation or something. And then if you want to talk about some aspect of science in general, or you're taking a graduate level course that's tying in, then you go to a new paragraph, right? You don't necessarily want a paragraph to be a sentence, but they don't all have to be 12 sentences, right? You can vary them. But it is important to have your information have some kind of flow. It doesn't have to flow like an essay that you're doing for a class that's 10 or 12 pages. But it does need to, you do need to have a topic for a paragraph. You need to let reviewers know what you have to say about that. And then you need to move on, right? And not try to go and do half of one thing in a paragraph and then half of it later, right? So think about the kinds of points that you want to make. And this is where doing a little mini outline for yourself can be very helpful. And I know that's old-fashioned, and I know we all don't do that because, you know, it seems to take up time that we could use on our writing. But it can be very useful to set out the 3 to 4 to 5 points you intend to make in your personal statement and then follow that, right? You can move paragraphs around later if you need to. And I often tell students to do that. But you definitely want a paragraph to have a topic. Okay, so be specific. We often try, just like I'm trying to do in this presentation, where I'm trying to be really broad and talk about a lot of things, but you don't do that. I don't want you to be broad for the most part. I want you to be specific because you have very specific work that you do. You have a very specific plan for what you want to be doing at UK, for what you want to be doing at graduate school, for what you want to do professionally. Now, some of you are like, well, I don't know exactly, and that's okay, but you have several ideas about it. You know, pick the one that seems most relevant to that particular award or whatever. I always say to students, even if you say, I'm going to get this major and I'm going to go to graduate school and I'm going to be a PhD, if you don't do that exactly, they don't come take the award back, right? It is okay to have your career go a different way. But what you can't do is just give them lots and lots of options, right? So you do want to think through a way that you're going to talk about your career and your goals. So, and be specific. It is not, reviewers would much rather know what your actual interests are, what your actual work is like, where you intend to take it, than for you to say, oh, well, I could take this anywhere, or, you know, I want to be somewhere in the space industry, or, you know, give them something to really understand you with. And if it's too vague and it's too open, it applies to too many people. So that's the one thing. Sometimes, you know, people will say things like, I love research, or, you know, I'm a hard worker, or whatever. But those are, lots of you would say things like that, you know, and so you want to say, if you're going to say something about you love your research because of these reasons, and here's what I've done as a result of that. You always want to give specifics. So absolutely don't try to be everything to everyone. Write the statement as it applies to you now in your career and where you think you're going. Now, I had this sample, and we'll talk about it more, but I want you to kind of, you can just read this, and I'll give you 10 seconds to do that. And you think in your own head, it's a good paragraph, bad paragraph, what do I think? And I will talk with you about it. And what I may do is let you go look at the other example first, and then I may come back and talk about this. But did everybody get a chance to read? Hopefully, maybe I see a few heads nodding, about most heads I'm not seeing. So anyway, we're going to talk about this just sample. Know your audience. We talked about this earlier in reading the prompt. You guys, it's okay to be technical because you're in STEM and you guys have very technical things that you're doing. They're very specific. You have a very specific knowledge base. It is okay. There are times when it's not okay, and that would be like if you're applying for Fulbright. Some of you have talked with me about that. I will help. If you're applying for an award and you're have concern about that, then please ask me or ask your reviewer. There are some awards where you have to be much more general because your reviewers are not in your field, or they're not even close to your field necessarily. But the awards that we're talking about tonight, the awards that a lot of you are thinking about, REUs, the Beckman, Kurfeld, these people are in your field or very close, right? Or you're going to have reviewers that are in STEM. So maybe if you have a word that you know is so technical and arcane that is literally only used in a very small subset of people, then give it a little explanation, right? If you know that. But in general, to use the language of STEM, the language of engineering, the language of biology, you can do that in your statements, right? So you can talk about your work in the way that's best for you to talk about it. Now, make sure you're right. And this is where I have students have, sometimes, you might not have quite understood the process. You don't want to describe it wrong. And this is where having your mentor read it can be very useful. Right? But you can speak in technical language, and we don't always say that, but you guys are going to be okay for this. Now, here's another sample, and I'm going to talk about a little bit how these relate, but I'm going to let you take a minute to read this. Now, I do not understand this, okay? But I am not in this field. The people who would be reading this will be computer scientists or engineers who will have a better idea of what this means. But here's why I'm showing you this, and I want to go back to the previous sample. When you read this paragraph, and probably when I read it for the first time, and let me say, by the way, these samples are from students who are long gone from UK. There is no way that you knew them. They are from many years ago when I was first in this position. So it's no trying to think who in the group wrote this, because none of you did. There's nothing wrong with like the writing, right? To create the information that will one day be written in textbooks is the beauty of research. It's an intellectual satisfaction. It's more satisfying to troubleshoot and figure out. Okay, fine. This paragraph is fine, except it doesn't say anything. The reason why it doesn't say anything is this paragraph could have been written by anybody, any of you, right? You maybe want to write to be written in a textbook. You get intellectual satisfaction. You are satisfied to troubleshoot, right? Also, I didn't give you the prior paragraph, and I only gave you this first line of the second one, but the prior paragraph didn't have any relation to this paragraph, and the one following it didn't have any relation to this paragraph. So this was just kind of a random paragraph in the middle of a statement that said these things. So I'm not critiquing the sentences. I'm critiquing the purpose of this paragraph in a statement. It doesn't say anything specific about the student who wrote it. And they didn't get the award, but that's not, but that one paragraph is not why, but I was just trying to give you a sample of, we all write paragraphs like this, right? We're trained to, and they sound fine, but then when you think about them, they don't convey any actual information about you as a researcher, as a future scientist, as a student. They just don't convey any information. This one, on the other hand, I don't necessarily know if this is correct, but they did get the award. But this is really specific. And then they tied it into at the very end. And I probably wouldn't have done it this way, but during this, I'm going to have to move you guys over to my other side. But during this process, they added an element of challenging and problem solving that I had not encountered before. If you remember from the other paragraph, the person talked about problem solving and troubleshooting. That's what they were trying to convey, partly about themselves. This person was trying to do that too, but after they had talked very much about their project. So I guess this is what I'm trying to get you to understand, is that if you're going to talk about something like I'm interested in problem solving or intellectual challenge, these big concepts, it's not that you can't do that. It's that you need to connect those to very specific ideas about your work or to your actual practice of your work, right? You can't just say them randomly. Because I can say I'm really interested in intellectual inquiry. I can say, I'm interested in problem solving and lots of people can say that. All of us can say that. It applies to all of us. What doesn't apply to all of us is this thing about joint angles and right. So you need to write the statement that you could be identified in your statement, right? That work you've specifically done and how you connect it to qualities and skill sets that you want the reviewers to know about. Now, these are just some general things that I wanted to say, because I think sometimes, but again, these are very broad. We are taught to repeat the prompt in our response, and I see this all the time. And sometimes it's not bad advice, but sometimes you only have 300 words to convey what you've been doing for the last 3 years in your research. You don't have space to repeat the prompt. Remember, your application real estate is really valuable. You need to use it to the very best that you can to talk about you, not repeating the funder's prompt. So you might echo words, right? They might have some specific words that you could use in your writing to echo back to the prompt, but don't repeat the prompt. I know this is really hard sometimes when I say to students, you can't refer to high school. And of course, it doesn't always apply, because some of you are in your first year, right? And you might have had some research experience in high school. But some of you are, juniors, right? And at this point, you have moved well beyond what you did in high school. Your expertise is well beyond, your accomplishments are there. So you don't need to go back. Most of us, I do the same thing. We use way more verbs than we need. Has been able to do it. We use that, I don't know, past imperfect, whatever that tense is, where we use a lot of verbs. We talk in the past. Please don't do that. Use present verbs whenever you can, or the simplest past tense verb that you can, but mostly keep it future oriented, because they want to know more about your future than your past. That's what they're looking at you for. So you want to talk about what you're doing. Some of that obviously will be past, but it will be only shortly past. So you can mostly talk about these things in a very present way. I realize this next point is really hard, and maybe the way we're talking about it is not clear. When I say try to make every sentence have a purpose, you don't want filler, and you're like, well, every sentence, sometimes you do need transition sentences, and I understand that. But what you don't want is that paragraph where there were 3 lovely sentences, but that didn't actually convey anything about the student. That's what I mean when you don't want filler. You want to try to make sure that your sentences are literally building the argument that you're trying to make about, I am a really great researcher. I am moving into a really professionally productive stage of my undergraduate research, and here's why. Right. So that's what I'm trying to say, in that you want your sentences to have purpose, because you want them to be building that argument. You don't want just random sentences. Again, don't repeat, because you mostly don't need to. You worked on the document in multiple stages. Your reviewers will read it in one stage. So they're not going to forget from the first page to the fourth what you told them in the first page. Allow yourself time for multiple drafts, because personal statements are hard. These kind of statements are hard. And to try to get it in one go you have to be a way better writer than most of us are. This is just a tip, and we see meaningful a lot, we see passion a lot, we see unique a lot, we see, and so one, you might think about not using some of those words. But also, if you're going to use passion, a lot of that's common, and people will talk about a passion for research, but then immediately demonstrate what you mean. Don't just make the statement, I have a passion for research. If you feel like you need to, then immediately say, because I am doing this in the lab and we are accomplishing this. I mean, immediately connect it. Because again, you want this to be a statement that can be traced back to you. Oops, I didn't mean to do that.
Hey, Pat, you do have a question in chat.
Oh, lovely.
Sai asks, is it okay to write a statement that is specific in scope for a more generic nationally competitive award based on the type of award the student is applying for?
More specific in scope for a more general award?
Generic nationally competitive award. So Sai, correct me if I'm wrong, you were just asking if you can write the statement that can be applied to different awards?
I say always be specific. And do not try to write a statement that applies to multiple awards. That is not a good strategy for you. Always be specific because it's about you. You are not a generic person, right? That is not who you are. That is not the work you are doing. You cannot talk about all you have accomplished and how fabulous your work is and how much promise you have with a broad statement, right? You need to be specific and don't be afraid of it. You guys are doing great work. If you weren't, you wouldn't be considering these awards. You wouldn't be in this workshop. We have more faith in you than you might have in yourself. Be specific. Don't be afraid to own your work. It's very, very good. Now, I'm almost through, and then I will open up for other questions, comments. Start early and get feedback. This is good for anything, as you know, right? This is advice you've probably heard in many things, and it's something we often don't do. But have someone else read your statement. Don't be afraid of that. If you're having someone at UK read your work, me, Emily, Jesse, hey, we want you to get the award. We want you to get the honor. I mean, if we give you some feedback that asks you to think about something, or maybe you want to change that, or that focus, it doesn't seem quite in focus. We're not criticizing you. We're just trying to help other people see how amazing you are. So please have other people read it. If you would like feedback from Emily or I, we are going to do some specific feedback appointments. And I may have to have Emily talk about that, or she may have already put the link in the chat. Did Emily get in? Oh, there you are.
Yes, I'm here, and I put the link in the chat. Yes.
So what we thought we would do is we would set up some half-hour appointments and let people come in. And we just thought we'd give you some dates and times tonight so that you could, if you already have a statement working, that you could go ahead while you're in the mood and you could register with us. Now, we're happy to find other times. If that doesn't work for you, no panic. I'm happy to set up other appointments, but we just wanted to try some small way to say to you, we want to be available. We will read for any award, right? I mean, that's what we do. It doesn't have to be something that even goes through our office, or that is we want to help you with this. And Emily and I have read enough drafts of enough different kinds of awards that we, can help, even if we don't always know your particular award in great detail. We have seen a lot of statements. So we would love to have you come see us. And we would love to have you come see us with enough time that you could actually maybe use the feedback. Sometimes students will come to us a day or so before, and sometimes that's not as helpful to you. But we would love to have you make an appointment with us, and we would love to see your draft before, just because if we only have half an hour or so with you, we don't want to spend a lot of time reading in front of you. We want to actually talk with you about your work. And then there's all the ways you can connect with our office. So, other questions? Oh, we had more people come in than I realized. Hello, everyone.
Caitlin Brock just asked a question in chat, Pat. Now, I will note that Caitlin is a current Beckman Scholar who wrote a very strong personal statement. But her question is, would you recommend discussing experiences such as research presentations or conferences in addition to specific research projects?
Yes, depending. Because I'm assuming those presentations or publications are related to the projects, right? So you could be discussing the project in a long paragraph, and you could say, and this work has led to the following publication, or this work has also been presented at the following 3 conferences. Now, at the same time, remember, some awards let you put your CV in there. in which case those things are going to be there. You could still refer to them, but you might not have to give the complete citation. Again, remember, using your real estate wisely. So that sort of depends on the structure of the application, exactly where you would put it, right? Some applications give you these very limited online where they don't let you submit your CV, but they let you put in some items about your work. And they're oftentimes, you know, have way too few characters for you to even get your research poster title in, right? In which case you may want to do it in a personal statement to say, we did the following thing. So that's one thing. Some of these things are going to be dependent on the kind of space you're given and the different elements you're asked to provide. Did that answer the question, Jesse, as far as you understood it, or Caitlin, somewhere in there?
Yes, that did. Thank you.
Okay.
We have another question. Would you recommend any additional advice for humanities-focused awards?
Well, no. I mean, they're the same because you have a language for your own field, right? And you can use that language. And again, you're doing research in your field or creative projects, or I realize it might be a few different things. Talk about those, but talk about them specifically. Don't just say, I love to read or whatever. That would not, you would probably not do that, but you might, I mean, it is true that people for Education Abroad Awards or things, Emily and I read this all the time. People talk about how they love to travel. And we just say, oh, dear, don't do that. Because one, that's mostly not what the funder wants to see, is that you love to travel. We could all say that. They want to know what you're going to get out of that, right? What are you learning? What are you giving back to that organization if you're doing an internship or something? They don't want to just know that you love to travel. So that's not the kind of overly broad phrase you want. So in the humanities, I would think you could do a very similar thing. It may be that you are doing a very close textual analysis of a work, right? And you would talk about that. And sometimes what a student will say is, oh, I'm doing a close reading of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, right? And then they don't talk about it any further, right? You ought to be able to go and do a full paragraph of what that means, you know, we're looking at these particular lines, or he repeats this particular theme, or, you know, those kind, or this character represents certain things. You need to talk about what you know and what you've done. And I think sometimes students assume that the reader will just know somehow, but we don't. You have to tell us what you want us to know. I can't hear you.
Sorry,
yes.
Aaliyah said, appreciate you. And then we have another question for you, Dr. Whitlow. While applying for research grants, would you recommend including informal research presentations in the application, such as presenting in a Zoom meeting to community leaders?
Yes. And I would put it on my CV, right? This is work. This is your professional work. So sometimes you're presenting to a lab meeting, or, you know, you have lots of ways. I would talk about it. It depends on how you might do it. You might say connected with a particular research project. You know, I had the opportunity to present to my research colleagues, you know, during our monthly meeting or whatever. You know, it might be a simple thing. It might be that it was a little bit more formal and it is actually on your CV. I mean, but I definitely find a way to put that in there. If you don't think, this is another tip, it's not really about personal statement, but just about application. If you have something that you can't fit in because it's a random thing and you're like, I have this beautiful essay that I've written and wordsmithed and had other people read, and I have this small factoid and it just doesn't fit, get a recommender to put it in their letter, right? Use every piece of your application, right? If it doesn't fit somewhere else in the application, if it doesn't really fit in the CV, talk to one of your reviewers and say, I just recently had this thing where I spoke, or I got published in this newsletter or whatever. It doesn't feel like I should put it in this statement, but I would like them to know. Your recommender can be very helpful in that way. And they would be very open to doing that. That's not, you're not dictating the letter to them by saying, you know, I've had this recent success and I can't figure out how to get it in the application. Could you add it to your letter? That can be helpful to them, right? To help them fill out their letter. So yes, absolutely. You're not trying to keep this stuff secret. Tell us the great stuff that you're doing. We want to know. We want to know. You have to put it out there. And sometimes I will be meeting with a student, we're talking, and I'll say something and they'll mention something and I'll be like, well, that's not in your work. And they're like, oh, I forgot. Don't forget. Don't forget. Go back and think through the last couple of years. What are some of the things you've done? Maybe you had a short-term research project. Maybe you had something in the summer you forgot. I mean, but think about all the things you've done, and maybe not all of it will go in your statement, but there may be something that's really relevant that you don't want to leave out.
Pat, you mentioned the recommenders. Do you have some tips for selecting their recommenders?
Dear. Well, yes, but one, I don't know exactly what all the years everybody's in. I know some names and I know where you are, but one, you have to focus, for those of you who are earlier in your careers here at UK, you do have to focus on this. Even if you're shy or it's been harder for you to meet faculty, you really have to work on having a solid set of people who can recommend you for things, minimum of 3. And by the time you're moving towards your junior, senior year, you want 5. If you're going to apply for the road, you may need 8, right? You want to have a network, right? So it's really important to work on that and focus on that and keep up with that. If you had a great faculty member who really, it was easy for you to talk to and you had a great experience in their class, don't drop them the minute you finish the class. Keep up with them, even in small ways, over the course of your academic career. Let them know how you're doing. We tend to think of, we took this semester, now we've taken our exams, this semester is done, close the book on that semester. Don't do that. Your career is a 4 whole years. You should think of it as one thing, right? Not a series of semesters. Really do think of it, what is the through line that ties it all together? So yes, recommenders that know you well. And how do they get to know you well? Well, because you went to see them in office hours, or you did research with them, or you showed up at events for your department and you said hello to them, or you went by their office hours, or you reached out to them and said, you're doing some interesting research and that's not quite in my field, but could I come talk to you about it? I mean, there's lots of ways, right? How do you get to know other people in your life? But it is really important, and I know it's hard, but it's one of those things that some students underinvest in early on, and we need to do better at that. Now, it is quite okay, I think, to go and talk to a faculty member and say, I'm applying for this particular award, a major award, whatever, and do you feel comfortable recommending me? I think you know me well, but I also know this is a very prestigious award. And do you feel comfortable that you have enough information about me to be able to talk about my promise in the profession? So leave them the ability to say no, because they may not feel they know you as well as you think they do, right? And that's good for you to know. Don't just give them your resume and say, here, make a letter for me, right? Because what happens is, and this is not the faculty's fault, but what happens is they will take snippets from your CV or resume, they will move them right into the letter, and they will say things like, also, Jessie is very involved in service project. And by the way, she also does the following. And it's so clear that they pulled it from somewhere else because they don't know anything else to say about it. So they just use the statement that's on your CV, literally sometimes a word for word, right? They just cut and paste it. So you don't want that, right? You want, if you feel like something is important for them to mention, you know, like if service is an important part of this or some other things, to maybe talk to them about that a little bit and why you value it and why it's important. And, you know, I would say many times for the most prestigious awards, you need faculty So be careful about using your academic advisor. It's not that academic advisors aren't amazing, wonderful people that we all adore, but you put them in a bad position when you ask them to write a letter for a major STEM award, and that's not their field, and they haven't done research with you. You know, they're just not the right, and in most cases they will tell you that as well, but sometimes you put them in a hard position because you say, I don't have anybody else. So that's where you've got to work on your networks. I can talk about recommenders all night, Jesse. How long do you want me to put to this?
No, that's perfect. We have 2 more questions for
Okay.
you. First, Sophia wants to know, do you have advice for streamlining statements with a very general prompt?
So it's like the REU prompt where it says, tell me what your personal and professional goals are, that kind of thing. Sophia, is that what you're, okay. Well, be specific then. I don't care if they have written an overly general prompt. I don't know. That's one, actually, instead of thinking that they are just idiots, you know, we could do that. Probably they're not. What they are doing is leaving you the opening to tell them what you think they need to know. Now, a lot of people will not take the opening. They will write this very broad statement. The other people will write a very specific, very targeted, very me-centric statement that allows the funder to know who you are, what you are doing, why that is valuable to you, what you intend to do in the future. So I don't care how non-specific the prompt is. My advice is still, and I don't think it's just me, I think it's other advisors in my profession, faculty I have talked to. I think if you talk to other people, they will give you the same advice. This is not just a Pat Whitlow thing. You need to write specifically to your experience. Again, I think you need to repeat to yourself, if the prompt is broad and generic, you are not broad and generic, right? So you are writing specifically what the work is that you do, what the work is that you want to do. You're not trying to match their prompt with an equally vague and open statement. Sophia, did that help? Okay.
We have one more question. Is it acceptable to ask the same professor to write recommendation letters for all the summer fellowships we are applying to?
Yes, but yes, of course, right? Faculty member, to be fair, the faculty member is going to write a letter for you. And then when you ask them again, they're going to take that letter and they're going to slightly change it. They're going to change the name of it, but they're not going to write a fully brand new letter for everything, right? Most likely they're not. So yes, that is okay. And that is not too much work for them. We did have a student, Emily and I have a couple of times, and I'm sure Jesse and Haven as well, we have had students who indicate that they're going to apply for kind of an extraordinary number. And I think at some point you're going to wear your faculty member out. So, and I also think if you do that, then you're just not being very discriminating about what you want and what fits into your career. You don't have to apply for every summer REU that says they take your major, right? You should really be looking for things that will advance you professionally. I'm not saying they have to be exactly in the line of what you're doing now, because maybe, for example, I'll talk about a student who is also long gone. He wanted to do work on coral reefs, like he wanted to do ocean type research. Well, we don't have coral reefs in Kentucky, right? But I worked with him all the time he was here, and we found everything that he could do. And, he went and did research in Florida, and he did, and found only the things. He didn't apply for stuff that wasn't in his field of interest. So he just didn't apply for any REU that related to his major, because that wasn't what he wanted to do. He was really interested in coral reefs. So that's not a huge subset of things available, but we found the ones that were available to him, and he applied, and he did really well because he was really passionate, and he kept building his skill set. He became a master diver, and he did all the things he had to do. So if you have something like that, I want you to be more specific. I don't want you to be applying for dozens of awards that are just all over the map. I want you to be applying for things that really do fit your interests and skill set and what you think you want to be doing in future. Now, if you're in your first year and you're applying for your first REU for the summer, I understand that that's harder for you and you may be looking at a broader set of things. So I think it's absolutely okay to ask faculty for more than one letter. And maybe you could say to them, maybe this is a conversation that you say, I'm thinking about, I've identified, maybe 7 or 8, I think that, do you think that is reasonable? Or, I've identified 57, which I just would be, rolling my eyes at that point, right? We start to feel like that. But the faculty will help you understand, I think, what is the set that you want. But this is where you really need to be reading the descriptions of the awards and looking closely because, again, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, but you're trying to write a specific statement that talks about your interests and the skill set you've gathered so far and where you want to go. So you're not going to be able to do that, many dozens of times for this summer. That's my opinion. I mean, some of you probably are capable of that, but I would be I would narrow it in, I think sometimes. I think students sometimes are applying for too many things.
I think that's our last question. Unless anyone else has anything.
I'm sorry, my brain just went on the fritz there. But I'm going to blame the cold. As always, I blame the cold for everything. But if you have other questions, Emily and I would like to talk to you. As you can tell, I get over enthusiastic about this and I will talk too long. But I promise if you set up an appointment with me, I will respect the boundaries of our appointment. So I would love to talk to you more about your work and the things you're applying for. And then we can talk about questions that are very specific to you and not in the broadest sense that we've had to do tonight, talking about lots of different kinds of things. Anything else you want me to mention, Jessie?
No, I'm actually encouraged to see people already signing up for those appointments. I just wanted to circle back to that Google Doc that Emily shared. If you all are interested, definitely sign up. It'll be 30 minutes well spent.
And again, this was just a first stab at us opening up some time. We are happy to find a time that works with your schedule.
Can we ask how many of you all are looking to apply for the Beckman Scholarship?
Do you want them to raise a hand or on the thing? How will you know?
Yeah, if they can. Okay, so Elizabeth. Are the majority of you all interested in on campus or off campus? If you can put that in the chat. Summer research fellowships.
And I did put a link in the chat as well. We have kind of just a general listing of some of the RU sites for next year. The main list on the RU website can be a little bit overwhelming because there are lots and lots of options and some of them haven't been updated. So that's a good place to start if you have an interest in those.
And I guess we should say, if you want to go to the Nationally Competitive Awards website, we have a Find an Award tool. And I realize it's a little bit rudimentary, but there's still a lot on there. And you can, you do have to do some filtering and there will be things that don't apply to you. But there is more summer research opportunities than just NSF. I mean, that's a great one, but there are others with medical centers. There are lots here at UK, but sometimes for some of you, leaving UK for summer is the right thing, right? Because you get a different mentor, you get an experience in a field that we don't have as much expertise here, or you're particularly thinking of that school for graduate school. There may be a lot of reasons why you want to do that. Well, I guess I just want to say was really fun for me because these kind of things are always fun for me. So I appreciate that you guys had questions and that you hung in with me. I really do admire you tremendously for all the work that you do and all the things you're applying for. And if I can be of assistance, I really do get a lot of joy out of that. So. Should I wrap? Oh, yeah. I'm turning it back over to Jessie.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much for this. This is